Let's take a look around our world. We're experiencing increasing global successes with everything we produce, but we're experiencing rapidly increasing social, economic, and environmental problems. People, economies, and the environment are the only things that we manage. Every decision and policy on Earth is being made to address either a social, an economic, or environmental need, desire, or problem. We make decisions about or manage ourselves, our economies, and our environment, and the rest falls under what we produce. Through humans managing economies, we use nature to produce everything imaginable, which immediately shows us that our management is failing on a global scale. Everything we use, consume, and produce comes from nature, which means that none of us can have social or economic stability if nature is unhealthy. And this tells us that almost every decision and every policy we make must have inseparable short and long-term social, financial, and ecological elements or complexity to have to consider and balance simultaneously. In the early 1980s, after dedicating his entire life to trying to find out why our management has caused increasing problems and land degradation over the centuries, Zimbabwean scientist and my father, Alan Savory, had a huge breakthrough. He discovered that none of us are born with the need and therefore ability to consider that complexity when we make a decision, because all of us are using a genetically inherited decision-making process that was designed for a time when we had simple stick and stone tools and only had to meet our needs or solve our problems in a social context. There were no ecological or financial consequences for us to have to worry about because we were not managing those things yet. A simple inherited process was designed to work perfectly for us, and it still works for all other tool-using animals. So what changed for humans, but not for any other tool-using animal? We learned how to control fire. After our control of fire, everything changed. Fire enabled us to be able to make more and more sophisticated tools, which resulted in our behavior starting to change. We began to be able to manipulate nature. We domesticated plants and animals and eventually ended up managing our environment. We had added an environmental element to our once only social decisions. We were also able to produce goods and started to trade things using a barter system, which was the start of our economies, which meant we had also added a financial element to our decisions. Everything we were producing came from nature, and everything being produced was being bought, sold, and used by people. We had merged inseparable environmental and economic elements into almost every social decision. Things had changed drastically for us, but we were still unwittingly using a simple inherited decision-making process, which has caused our decisions to have increasingly damaging knock-on consequences over the centuries because we had added financial and environmental elements to our once only social needs, desires, and problems. But we carried on using a subconscious decision-making process that is not designed for that change. We are all only born with the need and therefore ability to address our needs, desires, or problems in a simple, narrow context. So, what happened is when our social decisions became complex, we unwittingly divided them into more manageable parts so that we could make them in the simple, narrow context of either the social or financial or ecological need, desire, or problem we were trying to address. When we make decisions using our outdated process, we will still usually achieve our short-term objective, and then we consider it job done. For example, we will buy food, produce food, kill pests, adjust fiscal policy, plant trees, translocate wildlife, grow crops, etc. But our decisions inevitably end up being at the long-term expense of all three because we are separating the inseparable. The knock-on consequences of our decisions are invisible and usually felt later on and often far away from the decision itself, which is why we struggle to link the symptoms to our management. And it is why we are not solving our problems no matter how hard we try, because we are using the same decision-making process that is causing those problems to try and solve them. If we had been aware of using an inherited process at the time of our decisions becoming complex, we would have had to broaden the narrow context we use to guide our decisions to include the new social, economic, and environmental components and tied our social and economic stability to environmental health. A broader context would enable any of us to keep sight of all the elements of our decisions so we could see and balance the full and unique short and long-term social, financial, and ecological components of any decision or policy. When Alan Savory discovered this outdated flaw in the way we make decisions, and because he knew our problems were connected and complex, he began to study Jan Smuts' theory on holism. Holism is the theory that the different parts of a whole are interconnected and joined in such a way that they cannot exist independently of the whole, and therefore none of the parts can be understood without reference to the whole itself. And there's a parable about blind men being asked to touch different parts of an elephant, and they each think that they are touching something completely different. That is because each of them is only experiencing part of the elephant. None of them understands that what they are touching is an elephant. So, if they can each only experience parts of the elephant, could they know what an elephant is? No. If they each studied those different parts in detail, would they understand an elephant? No. Could they manage the elephant by making decisions for those parts in isolation of each other without affecting or causing damage to the elephant as a whole? No. Why? It's because the different parts of the elephant are not independent things. Nobody can understand or manage the elephant by studying or making decision for it in parts. The parts are not reality. They cannot exist without the whole elephant. Only the whole is reality. Now, another way to look at this or to think about it is, imagine I gave you a ball of brown Play-Doh. What three colors make brown? They're blue, red, and yellow. So brown as a whole is made up of three inseparable colors or components: blue, red, and yellow. Now imagine all our decisions as brown, and the blue, red, and yellow represent people, economies, and nature. Could we understand brown by only looking at or studying blue, red, or yellow? No. Could we isolate the blue, red, and yellow from each other without affecting brown? No. Could we successfully manage brown by making a decision for either blue, red, or yellow without affecting the other colors? No. Could we make a decision to change yellow, blue, or red without it affecting brown as a whole? No, we couldn't do any of those things. And this is no different when it comes to the things we manage. Just like the brown Play-Doh or elephant examples, our societies, economies, and nature exist as one giant, complex whole, which is made up of endless connected and interdependent parts that can never be fully understood or successfully managed in isolation of each other. Yet, for thousands of years, we have been unwittingly doing that, and separating that complexity every time we make a decision or develop a policy. And just think of how much we have disconnected these things in today's modern world. Just imagine all the different social, financial, agricultural or environmental careers and studies available, and all the separate social, financial, agricultural and environmental ministries or departments in our organizations and governments. We cannot ever understand or successfully manage the whole of anything if we only understand and make decisions for it in parts. It all seems like common sense when we think of it using these simple analogies, but that is what every individual, family, community, business, organization, and government is doing every time a decision is made. All our decisions are brown, yet we are unwittingly making decisions about brown by breaking it down into simpler contexts, blue, red, or yellow parts, and we address our needs and problems in the incomplete context of either the blue or the red or the yellow, instead of our decisions being made in line with the broader context of brown as a whole. We get advice from blue experts who have no understanding of red or yellow or brown. We get advice from red experts who have no understanding of blue or yellow or brown. We have yellow experts arguing with other yellow experts about how to manage the yellow, etc., etc. And there are people all over the world fighting over what we think we should do to improve red or yellow or blue, but nobody is zooming out to see that blue, red, and yellow are just inseparable parts of brown. Nobody is making sure that their blue, red, and yellow decisions are made in the context of brown. And this is a complete disaster when it comes to where we make decisions for ourselves, our economies, and the environment at scale through government and organizational policy. No matter how comprehensively or holistically we think about or approach any decision, policy, practice, or project, at the point of any decision itself, we automatically break brown down into the simpler parts of blue, red, or yellow. We break them into social, financial, or environmental. And no decisions are being made in the broad context of the whole. And we wonder why our problems are increasing. Whenever we form governments or organizations, we create monsters because they literally take on a life of their own. Organizations and governments don't think or act or get treated the same as any individuals would. An organization can develop policies that kill or harm millions of people, cost billions of dollars, or destroy the environment, and nobody can be held accountable. Policies that come from organizations are not ones any individual would ever make because organizations are incapable of humanity and common sense. Organizations will meet short-term objectives with no consideration to the inevitable and devastating long-term consequences. And when we think of these now reductionist decisions where we manage at scale through organizational policies, where a problem with red, yellow, or blue is mistaken for the context, we can begin to see just how damaging this really is. All governments develop policies for each different ministry in isolation of each other. Decisions are made based on expert advice in the incomplete context of addressing the needs or problems of each separate social, financial, or environmental ministry. Yet every policy suggestion any of them make will involve and knock on to affect the people, economy, and environment across the whole country. One of the most damaging results of the increasing knock-on consequences of this outdated decision-making process at policy level is that our agricultural policies have caused agriculture to become the most destructive extractive industry on the planet. Agriculture is the production of all food and fiber from the world's land and waters. Without agriculture, we cannot have civilization. And the fate of all civilizations follows the fate of agriculture. Common sense tells us that without question, agriculture must be based on the biological sciences, healthy soils with high biodiversity and stability, etc. But Because of the way policies are developed and the way institutions behave, mainstream agriculture is insanely based on chemistry and the corporate marketing of oil and technology. And this is because ecologically illiterate politicians in cities are developing agricultural policies in the incomplete context of the need to produce big quantities of food and fiber, so they will. And they will meet the short-term objective of producing as much food and fiber as quickly as possible, which has resulted in the increased use and pushing of chemicals and machinery with no regard to the absolutely devastating and rapidly increasing social, economic, and environmental consequences. These policies result in the laws, regulations, taxes, subsidies, and research influence. And while land managers at an individual level can choose what to produce and how to manage their businesses, this is only theoretically true, because in practice, government policy dictates to our farmers what they produce and how they produce it. And even though many people are starting to support practices like sustainable, organic, grass-fed, permaculture, regenerative, etc., most of these things were already practiced in the past for thousands of years. And all agriculture was organic and all animals were grass-fed. We didn't have fossil resources or today's machinery and chemicals, and whole civilizations were based on some of the things we are now calling new and sustainable. But that agriculture of the past destroyed more than 20 civilizations. In those days, the knock-on consequences of our outdated decision-making process on agricultural policies and farming practices were far more gradual and were just affecting individual civilizations. But in today's modern world of hugely advanced technology, combined with our outdated reductionist management of agricultural policies and practices, it sped the damage up hugely, and now the collapse threatens all civilization. Which is why it is so urgent to get people to stop thinking that changing practices will solve anything and start changing the management that will make our practices and policies successful. Until relatively recently, we simply have not understood why our management has been causing more and more trouble, or why our social, economic, and environmental problems increase no matter how hard we try to solve them. Luckily for us, we have not only found the cause of why our management has been causing problems for thousands of years, we have also found a solution. By adding just a couple of very simple steps to our inherited way of making decisions, we can update the process and literally change everything. And the first step for anyone, from individuals to governments, is to learn how vital it is to develop and use a broader context to guide all decisions or policies, regardless of whether the actual decision, whether the need, desire, or problem we want to address is social, financial, or environmental. This new process was developed by Alan Savory, and he called it the holistic management framework because it is based on the theory of holism. When we use this new process to guide any decision, practice, or policy, we are able to easily keep sight of and balance the unique social, economic, and environmental components of any decision, which prevents damaging knock-on consequences, and we can begin to reverse the terrible damage our reductionist decisions and policies have already caused. None of us can know if any decision is right for us given the inevitable and unique complexity involved until we develop and use a broader, holistic context to guide the decisions for whatever whole those decisions will impact, from a whole person or family to whole organization or country. Ownership of and commitment to a broader, holistic context is absolutely vital to successful decision and policy making. But using a broader context to guide our decisions isn't easy at first, because none of us are genetically predisposed to ever need to do it. So we have to consciously adapt to this new process in order to stop ourselves from automatically making decisions in the incomplete context of either a social or financial or ecological need or problem. So before making any decision or suggesting any action, we use a broad, holistic context to guide us in order to know if that decision will be simultaneously socially, financially, and ecologically sound in the short and long term. It doesn't matter what decision or policy we are making, whether we want to know if we should have children, plant trees, produce food, kill pests, buy a house, dip livestock, buy clothes, change agricultural practice, change diet, or immigrate. In order to prevent ourselves from making those decisions in the incomplete context of either the social or financial or ecological need or problem we are trying to address, we must teach ourselves to stop at the point of decision and imagine we're putting on a pair of 3D glasses and first check to see if the decision will lead us towards or away from our broad holistic context. If we find that the decision would lead us away from our holistic context, then we must look for a better decision. This process guarantees that the right decision becomes apparent in any situation and that we make the best decision we can given the unique complexity involved at any given time, and that our decisions or policies are consistently taking us towards social, economic, and environmental stability. Nobody should give advice or suggest any action until there is a broader holistic context to guide them, so that they can keep sight of and balance the full and unique complexity that their advice will inevitably impact. This includes expert advice. All expert advice should be guided by a broader holistic context in order to check that it's appropriate for the complexity involved, because even when the approach is holistic, at the point of decision the complexity is inevitably broken down into simpler parts, and suggestions are made in the incomplete context of addressing a need or problem in their specific area of either social, economic, or environmental expertise. This adjustment takes a bit of effort at first because we are all hardwired not to zoom out when we make a decision. But after a little practice, it becomes second nature. The power of global change lies in a holistic context. Ownership of and commitment to a broader holistic context is absolutely vital to successful decision and policy making. Ultimately, the only economy that can sustain any country is one based on regenerative agriculture, because all life on Earth depends on the plant's ability through photosynthesis to convert sunlight energy into edible forms. No nation on Earth can have physical or economic stability unless their agriculture is regenerative. And no agricultural policy can be regenerative until we update our outdated decision-making process and change how all policies are currently developed. What all governments need is assistance from experts in managing and balancing the inseparable social, economic, and environmental complexity of any policy. The first government to do this will lead the whole world in addressing the cause of what is now culminating in global desertification and climate change, but is a problem that has plagued humanity for centuries. As soon as we change management, we will begin to reverse the damage that our decisions and policies have caused to our world so far and bring ourselves back into balance with each other and our planet to secure the future for our children. Thank you.